Hello, everyone, and on behalf of the Sugar Queens, welcome and thank you for joining us this month. I am Dr. Eden Miller, an osteopathic board-certified family practitioner in Bend, Oregon. I'm a diabetologist and obesity medicine specialist, and I'd like to introduce you to one of the other Sugar Queens, Jen and Davida. Jen, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Goldman. I'm a professor of pharmacy practice at the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy in Boston, Mass. And I run and developed the cardiometabolic programming at Welllife Medical in Peabody, Mass.
Hi, I'm Davida Kruger. I'm a certified nurse practitioner at Henry Ford Health in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to tee it up to our audience, our learners who are turning in from YouTube and LinkedIn or Facebook. Are you using CGM to adjust medications in your persons with diabetes? What questions do you have? Because I want you to stick around for the next 30 minutes. The Sugar Queens will present and discuss the benefits of using CGM in an older aging individual, a population that can be easily overlooked for technology. And we are going to dive in of how we can tighten time in range in this group safely. I think there's this incorrect assumption that the aging population will not benefit from increasing time in range. And we target a higher A1C due to studies of the past. But remember, those A1C studies, many of them were related to negative outcomes of hypoglycemia because we couldn't manage the glycemia beneficially through the use of CGM. I still believe the body likes normal, but we should strive for a destination with those individuals without hypoglycemia and in all persons. For me, the goal of the aging population is to avoid hypoglycemia and using therapies that prevent hospitalizations, decrease complications, and encourage that engagement. So Jen's going to walk us through a case that's going to tell us how we can go beyond an A1C in a person aging. We can use CGM to highlight where the problem glycemia is. And she's going to talk about how we redistribute the insulin throughout the day and maybe even improve time in A1C without having hypoglycemia. And maybe we'll see an improved quality of life in this individual, irrespective of what their age is. So Jen, take us away on this amazing case.
Will do. Let's see. I think we have a slide for that. So this lady is one of my favorite patients. Spunky, healthy, just a wonderful lady. She has type 2 diabetes. So at the time when I'm seeing her, she's taking Degludec basal insulin, 18 units a day, metformin, 500 milligrams, 2 tablets twice a day of the extended release. Her A1C is 8.1. She could not take an SGLT2 inhibitor, and she could not take a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So she had some issues with that.
You know, that's a great tee-up case because it brings up a lot of things. But Davida, what do you see? What do you see here at kind of high level? And what do you think the next step should be for us for looking at this individual?
Well, A1C does not predict what's going on with her glucose is around the clock. It does not predict if she's having low blood sugar or high blood sugar. And a 78-year-old, especially a spunky 78-year-old, should not be sitting around with an A1C of 8.1%.
Yeah, she's not having any hypoglycemia. And clearly, you've heard me kind of say in the past, I haven't written a prescription for a sulfonylurea in 15 years. I'm not going to start now. And certainly not going to. And we talked about last time that A1C is not protective. Remember, we had very similar hypoglycemia rates with people with A1Cs greater than 9 and less than 7 and less than 6. Very similar. So what we really need to do, and what I needed to do for her, is CGM, so we could see exactly what was going on.
Exactly. And remember, if you could pull us back to last month's podcast when we were live at the ADA, what were we talking about? We were talking about standards of care. And this individual fills the standards of care for several reasons. First of all, she's on a basal insulin. it should be offered to her for sure. Second of all, you know, we want, as the aging population with their risk of hypoglycemia for acute related events, I even think that their ability to kind of recover from hypoglycemia changes as you get older. And many of these individuals live alone. And so we really need to have them have that opportunity for that constant stream of information, and that they can see their numbers in real time.
And she's 78 years old, so she has Medicare. So we know that Medicare will cover it as long as she's on one injection, and we send the prescription to a durable medical equipment store. So she definitely qualifies for a personal CGM.
Yeah, and I think that bringing up the standards of care, where the recommendations is really to make it patient specific. What works for that particular patient, in contrast to ACP. So, you know, we've kind of talked about this a little bit about goals and what's right. And I know that it might be sounding controversial there when you have somebody who's 78 years old targeting an A1C of less than 7, which is exactly what I did with this lovely lady.
Yeah, you know, and I'll just kind of throw in the primary care perspective here a little bit. You know, I feel very strongly about a target that's given that has to do with trying to, you know, why did they choose that target that was higher? It was because they thought it prevented hypoglycemia. I don't think they're doing that target because they say these people do better. It really came around safety, and I'm here to dispel that myth. That target is not safe. Using CGM is safe. And many of my colleagues think that there's a barrier related to that. There's a lot of resources out there about how to create a workflow. You just got to pause. You got to look up. You got to not be distracted if you can in primary care to develop how that workflow works for you, because this is going to get covered. This is necessary and beneficial for this population. So get on board the CGM train and figure it out for your practice. Okay, Jen, take us into this AGP and tell us what we see.
So let's take a look here, and what you see here on the left is you can see her average glucose, and you can see her GMI, which is kind of gives us an idea of what her A1C would be for that, you know, 2-week period. I can't see it here. I think it says 8.4%.
Yes.
And her glucose variability is not horrible, but when we're looking at the time and range, you can look over to the right and you can see that graph, and you see in the dark blue is the mean. And basically what we're looking at, remembering she's on 18 units of degludec, basal insulin, is I'm taking a look at what's happening here. And almost everything is not in range. She's only 33% time in range.
Right.
And if you look at the times, you can basically see from the time she wakes up, we can guess, oh, she's eating breakfast. And she's staying high the entire way. So,
exactly. Davida, talk to us a little bit about variability, because I still see that confusion around it. You know, what does it mean? How do you use it in your practice? You know, tell us what goes into glucose variability and why we want to look at it and address it.
So she's got a really interesting glucose variability. So we look at the CV to look at glucose variability, and it's an algorithm of a math problem of the mean glucose, standard deviation, and a number of other things. And we're really looking for a number to be less than 34. And guess what? She's at 29. So you would think that that would be okay. Well, it's not, because not only do you have to look at the glucose variability, and if the patient's variability is obtained by like that roller coaster effect, and then you would tend to see the variability being greater than 34%, maybe being even 40 or 50%. But this woman's glucose variability is not high. It's 29. And it's because overall her blood sugars are high, but the same. And so when you look at her CGM, you see that the little puffy, cloudy, bluey stuff is thin, not wide. And you see that the line, again, is flatter. So you don't have a huge amount of glucose variability. But when you're looking at other CGMs, if you look at the CV and it's greater than 34, and now look at your glucose variability and where it's coming from. So if you have a real wide glucose variability with the cloud being really thick, then that's where you want to focus your mind, your eye, and the change. And with this woman, we can see that during the day, her blood sugars are just really, really high. And so that's where changes need to be made.
Yeah.
And the other comment I wanted to make, back to our last slide, was that, Jen, you were saying something about the 8.1% not being, where we want this patient. And even you said, that used to be for hypoglycemia. My fear is if we let this woman's A1C be at 8.1%, or say that's our goal, or our goal is 7.5, that woman's going to stay at over 8%. So we have to have the target of less than 7, so we get closer to 7 for a person like this. And also, I applaud you for ordering the glucagon, because whenever we're using insulin and we are shooting for a lower A1C, even though with CGM, we're going to avoid a lot of hypoglycemia, it's such a benefit to have on board for safety.
And that's a great segue to us kind of diving a little bit deeper into time and range. I often say you can know an A1C, but you're not going to know your time and range. In other words, you don't know where the problem lies or how to adjust it. But if you know your time and range, you're going to know your A1C. So Jen, talk about a little bit of the goals that we have for this individual and how you can take that time and range and make some meaningful impact.
Yeah, and I want to just also point out that I think a lot of people, especially in primary care, think that this is so time consuming, but in reality, having this data improves my workflow and time, because I would not be able to have this information or know this information or help this information, help this patient without having this data. And so it actually helps me save time to having this available. So in this patient, targeting less than 7, remember, we want people to feel good. People don't feel well when their blood sugars are that high. So targeting less than 8 just because she's 78 is not appropriate in this patient. She's ambulatory. She's relatively healthy. She lives a full life. Her husband comes to all her appointments. They're very sweet. They do a lot of fun things. I want to keep her feeling good without hypoglycemia. And so nobody's going to feel good with their blood sugars that way. People are fatigued, feel well. So I think if we go to the next slide, when we think about time and range, I want to ask the audience a question. So remembering her time and range is only 33%. I'd like the audience to vote on this. What do you want to do? Looking at this, do you want to, I don't know, do we have a slide that has the a multiple choice question that, do you want to increase her degludec from 18 to 20 units? Do you want to add rapid acting insulin, insulin aspart 4 units, 15 minutes before breakfast? Do you want to add rapid acting insulin 4 units before breakfast and dinner? Or do you want to do 4 units of rapid acting insulin before every meal, 3 times a day? So audience, what do you want to do? Do you want to increase her basal insulin? You want to add 1 rapid acting, 2 rapid acting, or 3? So +1, +2, or +3?
So I put those questions in the chat real quick. I put those in there so you can kind of see, because we are really trying to distill down what some of the options are with this individual. Now, as you're thinking about what you're going to do as a clinician, because this is why we're here for you to gain practice, for you to gain that insight in what you would do regarding that. The other thing that came up that I want you to address real quick, we got an amazing shout out from a PharmD out there in the United States. And one of their questions was, as we're waiting for people to think about their answer, with the advent of these newer non-hypoglycemic agents, right? We're going away from sulfonylureas and things that cause hypo. Why do we want to target a higher time and range when we have things like GLP-1s or SGLT2s that kind of do the work for us? And so I want to make sure that we talk about that, but I also want you to get us back on track too, Jen, to go through kind of what you did with this individual and those options regarding, because remember, this individual, we didn't want to use an SGLT2 or a GLP-1, so we're pretty much on board with the insulin. So this is a great answer. So what did you do, Jen?
Yeah, let's take a look. So what I did is I actually added, I did increase her degludec to 20 units, but I added aspart with breakfast. So I did a +1. So if you look at the data in with a +1, a +2, or a +3, doing it sequentially, just doing one at a time, actually had the same outcomes as starting +3 at all at once. And so for her, remembering, yes, she's healthy and doing very well, but for safety purposes, being a little bit conservative and doing one shot. And the reason why I chose breakfast is when you look back at where she started, she ate breakfast, went high, and the whole day was high. So let's see what happens if I add just the 4 units with breakfast. And you can see here what's happened. So her time in range has improved. Her GMI has come down to 7.2. So this is 2 weeks later, after doing that. So, and that target range is now, I can't see it.
She's at 86% now.
So now we're at 86% when she comes back.
And many of our listeners, I want you to know that we're seeing tons of comments coming in here about adding insulin with breakfast. And so, to your thought process and to those who are listening to us, this is what we got to see. But let's talk about the basal insulin. What are we going to do with that? Did you reduce it? Davida, what are your thoughts regarding that? Would you have reduced it? Would you have did a wait and see kind of approach?
Well, I think you can do it either way. I think people think insulin adjustment and starting insulin is more complicated than it actually is. So again, you always want to err in not causing hypoglycemia. And so you could have lowered the basal insulin while you add the rapid acting. However, I think she needed both. And for this reason, and Jen is going very slow and very low, looking at her data and then adjusting further. So for her, she might not have needed any change in the basal insulin, but it was clear that she had that jump after breakfast. So in my own practice, I probably would not have lowered the basal given what we're looking at. I would give a small amount of extra basal and a small dose of the Novolog. And again, the aspart, I want to say that I don't want to make it more complex than it is. There's algorithms you can use and say use 0.1 unit per kilogram of body weight and 0.4. Give them a couple of units, right? Just give them a couple of units and see what happens. And I think that's what Jen did. She picked a very nice dose of 4 units, which is not overwhelming. She had the CGM data. She knew that if she looked at the CGM data, she could tell that everything was not yet at goal, but getting there. So the patient could take that little extra of the basal insulin, and she wanted to get rid of the other. So the other thing to note is that her overnight glucoses looked okay, but still needed a smidgy. And if so, she
smidgy.
So she
fixed smidgy.
That's right. It's like a touch, a smidgy. So she fixed the daytime, which improved the after bedtime, and then that fixes the overnight as well. So go low, go slow, and don't cause hypoglycemia, and then you haven't lost anybody's attention.
So Jen, what did you do with the basal, and tell us where we're at right now?
So I did keep it at 20 and added that 4. I think it was 66%, not 86%. So it was so little. So she went from 33% time in range to 66
to 66
with no hypoglycemia. So that's what's critical. So now let's take a look at when she came back. So she came back with that, and I'll let you know, we'll ask the audience, what are our choices now? So let's take a look at that again. So she went from 33% to 66%. She's on 20 units and 4 units. And so for this patient, what do we do next? So what should we do? So when I taking a look here, she did a lot better, but you can still see from kind of 3 p.m. on, and you can tell where she's eating dinner. So and they're always amazed when I say, "Oh, you eat dinner about 6 o'clock," yeah. So we can see that. So I actually added a little bit of insulin at dinner time at this point. So if we look at the next one, do we continue the doses? We could, right? If we
could just see what happens. You could see what happens. You're not in a rush, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Some
But
of our listeners want to know what happens if we add units with dinner.
yes. So I added units at dinner. And so now here is where you see she's now on Degludec 20. She's on a Spart 4 units with breakfast, 4 units at dinner, but her GMI is now 6.6%, right? So yes, that's wonderful. It's great. She's in range, but now this is a smidge out of my comfort zone for her, right? So she's 78. I don't want her to have hypoglycemia at all. She has no hypoglycemia. So this is where I had to decide, should I back up a little bit on the basal? I've now added that 8 units total.
Right.
And so depending on that person, so I did actually lower her basal insulin at this point, because I went from 20 units actually to 16. So I had added that extra 4 at dinner time, and then I took 4 away in this case. So we went down to 16 units, so that and this is what happened. A little bit more comfortable at this time, was her target range at 70%, because she is 78. Does she deserve to be time range at less than 70%? Absolutely. We want to keep her feeling well, but not with hypoglycemia. What do you think?
I'm going to summarize this because I think this is great. You had this individual come in at 8.1 and she was on 20 units of insulin Degludec. She wasn't having hypoglycemia, but everything was up in the sky. And all you did is say, hey, listen, this is what's driving the A1C. These sugars are driving the A1C, and you give a smidge. That's our word of the day. You gave a smidge of insulin here with breakfast. Why? Because we really felt we could treat that one the first, right? Highest variability. Then you came back and said, things could still get a little bit better. And you gave a smidge with dinner, still keeping her safe, right? Hey, you've had 2 appointments now. You don't have to fix it all in one appointment. Then you see her back and you go, wow, she's doing good. But remember her age, her hypoglycemia. She hasn't had hypoglycemia yet, but you are forward looking. You're seeing the patterns. And so it's like you put a little more insulin here, a little bit more insulin here, and you pulled back a little bit here. That's brilliant. And you did it with Queen style because you improved her glucose. She's probably thrilled to see those numbers, to feel like she's doing well. She is on track. She's encouraged. And who's going to tell me that she shouldn't be doing this because of her age? No way. That doesn't disqualify you.
Yeah. What's wonderful about CGM is I can spy on people, and they know. I tell them that I'm going to spy on you. So I made a follow-up visit, but not for 2 weeks. I said, but I'll spy on you. So let's take a look. 2 weeks. This is 16 units now. So I lowered the 16 units. Let me do a little spying and see how she's feeling and how she's doing on that change. So if we look at the next tracing, you can see, I think that's coming up.
That's it right here.
Yeah. So she's on 16 units and that 4 units, and her time in range is 76%. That's in my comfort zone. Her glucose variability is doing much better. I mean, could we tighten this up a little bit? Perhaps,
sure,
at dinner, I can make this adjustment, but I didn't feel compelled that, I better call her and make an adjustment right this second. Let me see what's going on.
You could talk about food too. Go ahead, Davida.
Yeah. I was going to make 2 comments. The first one is shared decision making. Jen, this is a wonderful case, and I know you have a close relationship with this patient. But one of the things I think is really important is to say, I'd like you to take 4 units of Novolog at dinner. Is that comfortable for you? Because if I make the decision, I don't go home with my patients at night. And I always tell my patients that's a really good thing for both of us. But I think that the patients ultimately need to decide if that's something they're willing to do. The second thing I want to tell our audience is what Jen was looking at is a dinner problem. What's left there is glucose is after dinner. And so you don't want to play with that degludec anymore, because you've got what you need from the degludec. You have to focus on what's happening after the dinner. And Jen said it really well. Is it food? Is it a high carbohydrate meal? Is it I'm eating dinner and then I'm snacking till bed?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a conversation again to be had. But by increasing the degludec at this point, there's no great return there. You have to focus on what you're going to do with the Novolog and what's safe for the patient.
You know, another thing too, looking at this graphic, is her beginning blood sugar before the dinner and her ending blood sugar about 3 or 4 hours later is about the same. So you know that the dosing is correct. And so I'm going to just throw in here a timing issue.
Yes.
Make sure that we have that conversation. I know this is a little high level, and this is almost another Sugar Queen episode of timing of insulin, but timing matters, because the insulin that we do have can't get into the circulation immediately. And so having that conversation of, do you dose at the meal, after the meal, 10 to 15 minutes before, how do you feel comfortable? I still think all in all, we're doing great, right? Like we don't need, it's not broken. But if we have an individual who says, hey, I want to really work on those peaks, you know, I really want to try to improve that. What are some of the things? And I like that. We don't really need to increase the insulin because she gets to target. But remember, it's not just the amount of insulin, it's the timing of insulin, so that you could have that additional extra layer of that kind of conversation. Well, what a great case. And you know what, Sugar Queens, we got time for questions, and the questions are coming in. And so you know what, we still got a few minutes, and we've been with you, and we got a great audience coming today, because we're kind of talking about an area that for some may feel like we're going against some of the data out there. So I want to bring us back to that original question that came up. Let's take a kind of a generalized question of an aging population with the use of GLP-1s, with the use of SGLT2s that are non-hypoglycemic. Remember, we don't use CGM just for prevention of hypoglycemia. We use it for glucose targets. But let's each comment about that question, because there's a lot of chatter about that of, well, we don't use these as use CGM. The GLP-1s and the SGLT2s do all the driving.
Yeah, that too. And also let's reflect on Steve Austin wrote a comment on LinkedIn, a question for us about the use of SGLT2s and GLP-1s, and he's a long-term care pharmacist. So that they both those questions kind of go together.
Exactly.
Because you know what they're looking for in long-term care doesn't make a difference. Should we be using CGM in those patients?
Yeah, well, I can tell you first off, and then I'll let Davida go. I just published an article in ATTD looking at CGM use with GLP-1. And I like to say it's like we use multiple different tools for control. Yes, CGM is your speedometer, but what you push on your accelerator, that isn't your speedometer. It's not your GPS. That the CGM is your GPS. And so by that study, we looked at adding CGM to those people on GLP-1s, and we had a significant improvement. Why do we think that is? It's because CGM reveals the impact of lifestyle and other choices in illness and stress. And so to that long-term facility individual is when you look at the aging population through the lens of hypoglycemia, I want to bust the myth. It's not the target. I'm here to tell you, you can't use that A1C as a target to prevent hypoglycemia. We've got to use that CGM because your average speed doesn't matter. And so that's our first way to bust it. Our second way to bust it is you improve glycemia, which the cell likes to be normal. And so I believe you have less complications. But Davida, tell us your opinion about these newer drugs.
Well, first of all, I think CGM is a right, not a privilege, and that everybody should be given CGM. And it's way beyond what medications the patients are on, because it is all about behavior modification, owning your own diabetes, and being able to see. And so it doesn't matter that SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1s, and for that matter, metformin, in of themselves, do not cause hypoglycemia. It's still, as you pointed out to the article you just published, and for several other articles that I have read, when you take CGM and you add it to someone who's just on a GLP-1 RA, they get a better outcome because they can see what happens every single day. So yes, we want to make sure that people that are just on GLP-1 or SGLT inhibitor get to have CGM. And because of CGM, we can have lower A1Cs, just like this lovely patient of Jen's, because an A1C of 8.1% is not acceptable.
And we had a follow-up last week, and I said, "Can I take a photo with you for this podcast?" So here she is, lovely, doing very well. Happy to see her. She's doing extremely well.
I'm so glad. And you know what? Look at how we made an impact on her. You know, I love seeing you every month, lady. 30 minutes isn't enough. But you know what? We got additional programs to cover. You know, to get your CE and CME credit, scan on the QR code. We want you to be able to get this benefit. In addition, stay tuned. We've got some additional things and programs coming. I'd like to thank you for participating. It's always a pleasure, Queens, to be with you. On behalf of the Sugar Queens, hey, tune into us next month.
Bye, Queen.